Good afternoon, Aaron. Just on afternoon,
Hey.
1 minute past 12.
How you doing, Paul? Maybe maybe minimize my screen until we get into it.
Yeah, all right, I'll remove that. Hello, everybody. Aaron and I were just sort of like catching up on trying to double check how to get one of the examples going today. So we're slightly flustered at the start of our show today. But
So this really is devs in the shed on the fly, as in I blew this away and recreated this demo that I want to show you like right on the spot. It's still deploying right now, so we'll get into it in a sec.
Yeah, so hey everybody, and welcome back to the show. So for anybody that's been here before, you know that it's usually myself, Matt Coles, and Aaron. Today, Matt is working on delivering like a CDK workshop for like a really large range of our customers. I was just at that workshop this morning. It's really good. We talk a lot about CDK on the show, and more and more customers are leaning towards using CDK to build and manage and maintain their infrastructure as code, not as script. But yeah, for anybody that's like new to the show, devs in the shed is, well, I mean, usually we're in the shed. Today we're not, because we've just been like, super chaotically busy at the moment. Yeah, so
chaotically busy is probably the right word.
And it's been fun. But yeah, on the show, we usually will go through, some sort of new service, build some code, talk about something interesting, and get some feedback from some people. I think there might be there's a couple of people saying that the LinkedIn stream has got a blank stream. Probably not much we can do about that. That's probably like one of the streaming providers that's trying to push that content to LinkedIn. Maybe I'll paste to anybody that's watching. Check it out on
Twitch. Yeah, get onto Twitch.
Yeah, the Twitch stream is the best place to go and view that. So that's AWS Twitch's channel.
Yep, twitch.tv/AWS.
Correct. That's spot on, Aaron. So yeah, hello to everybody. Aaron and I are from Melbourne in Victoria, Australia, and it's starting to get a little cool out here. Where's everybody else from? Let us know where you're from. We often get people from around the world, US and Europe and so forth, and it's pretty interesting. But before we kick off into today's specific topic, which is, again, it happens to be CDK, the CDK AppSync and Dynamo DB tables. Oh, we got some people from Turkey. That's awesome. There was a couple of announcements that came out that I thought were just worth mentioning on the show today. We've done a couple of sessions and talked about like AppRunner, one of our many ways to run containers on the platform. I would say that last year in the demos that we've gone through, it was an early service, but it's come a long way even in just the year or so that it's been out there. So now they've got the ability for AppRunner to support X-ray support. So I'll paste that link in for people that want to read that. We won't go into it, but I thought that was definitely worth something worth calling out. So we've got Virginia, USA, Nigeria. Oh, we've got someone from Mars. That's pretty awesome. We've got a conference later in the year called Remars. So yeah, there you go. But good to see you, Derek. Perth, yeah, nice and sunny. The second one that I thought was interesting, and this comes up a lot on the show, and I'll only quickly touch base on this, but especially with Matt. Matt is a real fan of like Amplify. There's Amplify the CLI, but there's Amplify the UI library that AWS builds and supports. And the whole idea there is, get you into production faster, right? So pre-build a lot of components that interact with AWS services, take away, again, the undifferentiated heavy lifting, but doing so on the front end. So Amazon Amplify Geo launched a React component for maps. So I'll post a link to that specific announcement, but I'll also paste a link directly to the Amplify docs that show how you can go ahead and implement that. Most people have probably done some work with React at the moment, being able to just import a React component and pass in. If you look at the code sample, there's a const, which is just like effectively a tuple of the longitude and latitude. Pass in a longitude and latitude to your map component and have that render. I think that's pretty nice and pretty easy to be able to start leveraging some of our mapping components there. So, and I think Aaron had one as well that was going to talk about with Studio and Amplify Studio.
Yeah, so it's another Amplify Studio or Amplify launch. Last week, Amplify Studio launched what do you call it? File storage. So new file storage and file management capabilities. So when you go into Amplify Studio, previously you could do some very basic things with data and storage. Now they have better fine-grained control over Amazon S3 buckets and the ability. So Studio will create the IAM policies to scope access to the files based on, say, defined authorization rules. So you can set up who can list and view files, who can actually access and edit the files. But on top of that, they also have provided the capability in Amplify Studio to drag and drop files in. So that's a big step forward in terms of like application management. So if you've got your administrative users in Studio managing content for the application itself, mobile app or whatever, being able to provide files and stuff, drag and drop into the application through the micro content management system, which is Studio. That's another great launch for Amplify.
Yeah, it's probably something we might look at again. So we've done a session on Amplify Studio, but I think at some point we'll probably do that again. Yeah. I don't know the answer. 41 Wolves asked the question. I don't know if you know the answer directly for that one.
You'll recall I've spoken a few times on Amazon Location Services here on Devs in the Shed. So under the hood, the actual React app is talking to our Amazon Location Services map tile server. So the actual routing is done through Amazon Location Services, yes. So you can do more than just display a map. You're now getting into more, you need to understand how to do the application integration. So calling the routing service, and there's additional APIs that you call. But yes, you can do routing. You can do, we also released recently matrix routing. So actually doing efficient routing for multiple waypoints and stuff. So being able to calculate the least expensive based on either speed or distance, time or distance, I should say, because we don't want to endorse speeding on the road. So time or distance. And yeah, so that's matrix routing. But yes, there are APIs available for doing. Is there a workshop for that? Don't believe so. Not in Amplify. I'll have a look. Well, a little bit later, and we might drop a link if I can find a workshop for it. There is, if you go into the console, if you go to console.amazon, so you go to AWS console, go into the Amazon Location Service, there's a getting started in the console, and it has a demonstration of each of the capabilities. So you can actually see how to start integrating with Amazon Location Service.
Yeah, maybe something, again, we'll touch base on in a future show.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, by the way, for anybody that thinks that there was there's a specific release or update or something today, like let us know what you think would be, what you're excited about. And if you've got something like, ideas, share those ideas with us all the time. Like, we're a customer-driven organization, and I know that with my customers, I had like 2 updates this morning that specific customer requests that I'd put forward had been accepted and now a part of the roadmap. And we listen to that feedback, so like always give it to us. Before we kick off, one of the things that I thought would be really good for us today to just remind people of is the AWS Summit. So Summit is our event where for people that haven't made it to or can't make it to reInvent, there's Summit is a more localized experience. And so Aaron, myself, and Matt will be at Summit this year. There's a virtual event. Yep. There's a virtual event that everyone can register to, so that's completely free. But there are also some in-person, segments that are happening if you happen to be around. Aaron, myself, and Matt will be in Summit in Sydney for that event. So if anybody happens to, be around that time, reach out to us, let us know. We're probably going to do a little bit of a session around Devs in the Shed there. We'll do some video and walking around the event and showing some of the features that we've got. So thought I'd remind everybody about that, and I'll do so at the end as well. So Aaron, today we're going to talk about DynamoDB and global tables and multi-region and
So to Paul's point about what we do for our customers, like this little demo today, or this little discussion today, is really based on a solution or something that I'm working through with one of our customers. So it is actually customer focused in so much as they've come to us with a problem, and that's our job, is we try and help them solve that problem. This problem, in fact, is how to develop a multi-regional application. And so there's different patterns that we can follow for multi-region. Obviously, there's failover, which is the more traditional approach. If you have a primary region and something goes wrong at the DNS level, or there's a failure in one of the services and it sends it back up to your DNS saying, oh, look, it's not healthy, fail it over to our secondary region. That's one way of doing things. But then there's the highly resilient, highly available patterns where we have multi-regions running in parallel, and you want to actually be able to route traffic based on, say, geo-routing. So I'm coming from Melbourne, I'll hit the local Sydney region. Somebody else we had somebody from Turkey, they're going to be hitting the same DNS, and they might come in at a region that's much more close to them. And then so it actually reduces the amount of latency in terms of what we're talking about in the backend systems and stuff. So the little demo that I've got today, or before I jump into the demo, I wanted to sort of open it up to maybe anyone in the audience who's got any questions around, like, why would we do, or if you've got an example of a multi-region style deployment that you've done, I would love to talk about that. Paul, from your experience, where have your customers been working more multi-region?
At the moment, most of my customers are pretty region specific and region central, and I guess that happens because there's I work with a lot of organizations and industries that are compliance and regulation heavy, so they have specific requirements and regulation to say don't move my data in and out of regions. But it happens more with within the global reach retail sector, where you'll be saying I've got my specific e-commerce platform that might be available between different regions. You want the best experience for both sides. You don't want people to go to different URLs around that, so you want to direct them to the most relevant location for them. And I just posted in there Route 53 can do that and help you assist in that way. And you can use geolocation routing policies to be able to deliver them to the content that's most relevant and most closest to them. So I guess when you think about multi-region, I would probably say that most people or most customers typically are not saying I want to deploy my workload across multiple regions. We have availability zones that provide mechanisms for high availability, in a situation where you might have a major disaster or not a region outage, an availability zone outage. I got tongue tied there for a second. So you have availability zone outage. One goes down. You've got at least two others, wherever you are at that point in time. Building something across multiple regions for disaster recovery or failover is less something that our customers are asking about. However, there's been plenty of talk and announcement about a second Australian region. This is the region that's coming in New Zealand. So some of my customers are asking about that at the moment in those sort of scenarios. But I think what your demo today is with something like global tables is that ability to use a central data source and be able to have that data fed in from multiple different regions and replicated around with specific priority around what gets handled in what area.
So it is I 100% agree. Traditionally, the customers that I've been working with are very much the same. They use multi-region for disaster recovery, for backup even. So they have their primary region that everything's operating in, and then they're just sending all their data through replication over to another region, and then it's used to just keep it separate. However, what I'm seeing, there's a bigger trend in the SaaS side of things. So as larger enterprise and GSIs are developing SaaS solutions for their customers, they're starting to get into developing one set of architecture that's now operating at a global level. So instead of just being, hey, we've got this SaaS solution, we're going to deploy it into this region, and then we'll take a complete snapshot copy and deploy it into that region, and then you've got multiple regions all running in parallel. They're actually starting to break down that barrier between regions and share, as you said, so utilizing a centralized data store across regions. So now your regional differences are more around, say, latency and geo routing and like tenancy. So where do you exist in this application? You can still access information from across regions, but it's really about what's available in your region that you're using, to reduce latency and the like. A lot of this is tying very well with obviously serverless and usage-based patterns, or event and message-based patterns. So then they're just routed to the information in the quickest way possible. So the demo that I'm working towards here is actually the basis of sharing data between exactly that. It's a SaaS solution built on top of. I'm not going to get into the SaaS side of it, but it's a SaaS solution where anyone can come in from any geolocation, essentially. Like, what do I mean by a SaaS solution? So Netflix is a SaaS solution. You're using video streaming service on the web. You're just going directly to the URL and it sends you to the closest service for streaming, right? So a software as a service where all I need to know about as the customer is I can just access the URL, and then I've got access to my data. I've got access to whatever it is that the SaaS is providing. So the biggest problem that this customer in this example was facing was they've come from this traditional idea of we've got our relational database. It's very large RDS structure. We do have read nodes in different availability zones. We're doing some cross-region replication, and we've got read nodes in other availability zones in different regions. But it's becoming very cumbersome now as data is being introduced into the very large relational data structure to keep up with the replication. And also, if a customer then swaps zones, or somebody else needs to, same business, different office needs to access the same data, it's taking there's some latency or time in the replication and then being available for that other person to read. So looking at from a microservice pattern, starting to break down the data from our big relational database structure into smaller manageable parts. And so now we're actually just looking at like smaller functions within a solution that can depend on functions like DynamoDB global tables. So a DynamoDB global table, in this case, is the ability to create a table in a primary region that has a specific name, and then specify the replication regions. So where are the regions that I want this table to exist in? And DynamoDB will create the tables in the other regions with the same name. So now in every region that you've specified, you'll have the same table, and equally, it will manage the synchronization between the tables. So if I write into, I'm here in AP Southeast 2, if I write into the DynamoDB table here, it'll show up in the US East 1 because I've specified US East 1, or any other region that I've specified as soon as I've written it to my DynamoDB in AP Southeast 2. So it's almost near real-time data replication for entry into our table. So let's actually get into some code.
Like before somebody asks something.
Are you on mute, Paul, or have I lost sound?
No, I think that was just me on mute.
All good.
So just a quick question on that. So, this came up just the other day. Somebody was talking about DynamoDB, and we don't have ACID compliance, but we do have transactions. So we do have the ability to, to ensure that, a record is being locked while we're making a change to that specific record. How does that apply to global tables?
Which part? ACID compliance or the ability to lock a record?
Transactions, right? So we're replicating data all over the place, and I write to a table in Australia and someone writes it to the US, does it handle that as well? Can we do transactions on global tables?
Yeah. So yes, yeah, absolutely. So it's transactional across the global tables, right? So it'll write in one region, write to the other, and then you can modify that record and it'll modify it back in this region.
Okay. Yeah, I just wasn't sure whether or not you could do like transactions across global tables. So I mean, people might have been wondering about that questions, but yeah, I just wasn't sure about that.
Yeah. So that's a good call out. So no SQL know-how actually says transactions in the global table is a regional construct. That's very true. And then also if you so how does it work, right? So if you make a insert on DynamoDB table in this region, that will that'll trigger your, your local regional insert, right? So you've got your DynamoDB streams. So then you can, trigger your Lambda, whatever happening in this region. That doesn't span the globe, but it does then, once it's been written, it then does replicate. So it's the same as doing replication on other data's. What do we got? Does not span. Yeah. Whoa.
Yeah. So I spammed the docs there. So I quickly looked that up, and I mean, like we're not like a working encyclopedia, so we didn't know that answer. And I generally didn't know whether transactions work across global tables. So I guess like what we're saying is you can't lock transactions across global tables the way we were talking about it then.
Yeah, you can't lock them. You can modify in different regions and it will replicate. Yes, sure. But sorry, I misunderstood the question. But yes, no, it's not locked when it's
right. Yeah,
it's not locking it. Yeah.
Transactions can be written right. I'm talking about locking the record so that I can write it. Yeah. So maybe that's where the confusion came in, and that's why what I was specifically asking about.
Yeah. So yeah, cool. And that's a good thank you, NoSQL know-how. Great call out. Like, sorry for my confusion there. Yeah. So we're not locking the record. It's basically write record, then replicate. But at the time of writing, when it's written in your local region, that will trigger your streams and every workflow that you've got based on that. It's not going to trigger the same for the region that it's replicating to. So once it's written, it's there.
Yeah, and NZ Laura asked the question. So like, what happens if there's a conflict across regions? Like, I'm not going to answer that question. What exactly happens? Like, I would assume that like last in wins, right? Like, I don't know whether that's, but for sure, like the next comment from Laura is a potential for a record to be overwritten. But the idea of like a global table is less like a globally distributed like read write table. You would have like region specific tables for your application. So you would architect and build your application so that people in like Australia are writing to the Australian based area, people in the US to the US based area, and then you might have something that consolidates them all together, so that you can have globally available data for like reads, but probably not globally available data for writes, regional specific areas for writes. I might not be super clear what I'm explaining, but that's the way I would be like building and architecting my applications. You have to imagine that there is some time conflict. Like, we talk about near instant, but it's not going to be as fast to replicate globally as it is to replicate like inside a region.
Yeah. So NoSQL know-how says yes, Paul, you're right. Last write wins, and we know this is an authority because NoSQL know-how is actually on the DynamoDB team.
Okay, well that's perfect then. So I made that assumption. I didn't want to answer like exactly and precisely because someone might hold me to that.
So I think that's a good point, and it really does come down to what you're saying here. It's more about your application architecture and less about the last write wins, less about the writing to the database and more about how you're architecting your application to use the DynamoDB table or to use the data. If you were like writing and reading and modifying records in rapid succession, this may not be the right solution. You may not be wanting to use global DynamoDB table. You might actually want to do regional tables and do data replication based on other conditions. You might even want to do if we could do, what do you call it, RDS based guaranteed write, out to a reader, whatever. There are other solutions. It's not always the right solution. The solution that I'm looking at here, so the DynamoDB global table is not used for, as I said, remember we're going from a big monolithic solution down to breaking things into microservices. The DynamoDB table in the solution we're looking at here is really for holding tenant data. So it's not a frequently accessed frequently written to database. It is a frequently read from, but then we also need to read from regions to say, well, I need to know this tenant information when I'm coming from this location and get, say, this data. If I'm coming from another location or somebody else in the same tenant is coming from a different region, they need the same data. But instead of having to do the write and replicate it over, we can do a write. We may make a change and it will update it. It's just not a frequent, very fast, lots of changes. It's just make a change to your record and send it. Now everyone has access to it. So that's the scenario that we're working with in this example. I'm sure NoSQL know-how will have other examples of where you could use it in terms of where DynamoDB is being used in large scale global solutions with replication regions. You can retry files. So he always tries to implement. Vector Hacker always tries to implement transactions with conditions and handle the optimistic concurrency. Yeah, so that's exactly what I was saying, right? You do it at the application level. So you write for the fact that you are going to be doing you're going to be doing a write, and it's going to replicate it. And to Paul's point, it's not going to be locked while you're writing it. You're not editing it and locking it so nobody else can edit it. When you write it, if somebody else is going to write to or edit the same record to NoSQL's know-how's point and to Paul's point before, it's the last write wins. So if I start and then send and somebody else starts and sends after me, their edit is going to be up to date. So you need to account for that in terms of your application architecture, not just your relying on the database to handle it when you're sending the change. So good call out. Disney Plus is one public example. They talked about it in reInvent last year. Yeah, I did forget that one. So Disney Plus is using the DynamoDB global tables. So regional replicas. All right.
Let's get some code up. Are you ready to share your screen?
Yeah. Pull my screen up. So let's have a look at what I'm doing here. So this is kind of a lot of us have been talking recently about CDK. Matt, we're missing Matt today because he's away running a CDK workshop. Paul's just come from CDK this morning. So I wanted to throw some CDK at you. I've been running CDK workshops recently as well. I wanted to show you how simple it really is to set up a multi-region deployment using CDK. And all I'm doing in this deployment is I've backed out a few things so that I've got some notes there to show you additional, more complex things. But I've backed them out because all I want to show you is how easy it is to create our DynamoDB global tables, how easy it is to then find those global tables in our multiple region deployments as we're deploying an AppSync API. So we've got a very simple GraphQL schema. It creates an AppSync API, and then that AppSync API queries the regional global table. So let's quickly jump into. Let me make this a little bit bigger for people. All right. So I'm not going to go through all of the structure of CDK, but I will call out exactly what I'm doing here in terms of creating a multi-region CDK application. The first thing that I do is obviously we don't want to have to recreate our stack. We don't want to have a region, US East 1 stack, a region AP Southeast 2 stack written. We basically just want to create one stack and replay it across every region that we want to deploy. So the way that I'm working here is this is where CDK comes into its own on top of using something like CloudFormation templates or something that's declarative. Now we can actually start to apply logic, like the programming logic based on, in this case, I'm using TypeScript, right? So I'm going to go ahead and create a app regions array. So basically here, I want to list all the regions that I want to deploy to. Now for this demo, I'm just deploying in my local region, and I'm deploying into our master region, our main region, I should say, US East 1, right? I could add any number of other regions that I want to deploy to. However, the first thing to note is for this to work, every region that you want to deploy to has to be CDK bootstrapped. And by that, I mean, you have to run the CDK bootstrap command for each of those regions. So you can write a little script which will do it for each region. But all that's doing is it's creating that S3 bucket that Bootstrap needs in each region that it uses for deployment. So you can see here, I've got a schema.graphql. So that's used for my AppSync. It will actually need to deploy those assets into that bucket for every region. And then CloudFormation reads from that bucket and deploys it to the service that it's setting up. So I'm not going to go ahead and
maybe hasn't used it. Yeah, anyone that hasn't used CDK, it's like the first time you use CDK, you've got to bootstrap the region. So after that, you don't need to. You can have as many CDK projects as you need, but you've got to do that just one single time.
So that's really just to allow CDK and say CloudFormation. So there's a little CloudFormation stack created for CDK with the bucket. That's just to allow the CDK CLI to now manage CloudFormation deployments into that region or into that account. Yeah, it's region based. So you have to do it for each region. So into that region, so then it can deploy the assets that CloudFormation needs into that S3 bucket. So yeah, once you've done it once, it's done for that entire region. So for that case, I've only bootstrapped AP Southeast 2 and US East 1, so I'm not going to go ahead and add other regions just for the demo. But if I wanted to, that's all I would have to do first is CDK bootstrap. The next one is I'm going to set a global table name. Obviously, I want the global table name to be the same in every region. So instead of having to add a magic string to my stack, I'm going to add it here and hand it in. Otherwise, usually I would use, say, environmental variables or a config file, which has everything. So I can read everything in from the config file and keep everything separate in config. But for now, it's a simple demo. So I'm going to use constant magic string at my application entry point. And then the last one is just the global primary key name. So I'm going to use the ID column as my global key on the DynamoDB tables. So the rest of it, I'll jump into in a sec, but the rest of it is now actually looking at how to run my stack for each region. So obviously the first part is we got an array of regions. So we're just going to do a loop and then fire off my create stack for each item in my array. The only thing that I need to point out that's different to per stack is we want to have a primary region, which is the main region that the application is deployed into. So that's the region where the global DynamoDB table is created and then replicated from there into the other regions. And I think that's it in terms of, when we get into the more complex things, we need to have a primary region for our Route 53 hosted zone. So it's in our primary region, but it then does all the routing between regions and our certificate manager and things like that. So these are the things that I've backed out, but they're the important things to remember why you need to have a primary region and not just all regions equal.
So reading that code, you've just said the replication region is the second index of the array. And because it's an array that's index 1, which is the second item, is primary is just determining based on the index, for the first item, is it primary? Yes, it is. For the next one, no, it's not.
Yeah, so exactly. So if I had 4 or 5 items in this array, basically replication regions are going to slice, which means take out the first. So it'll take out the primary, and any other item in this array would be my replication regions. And then, yes, for the first run through, an array is a 0-based index. So the item, if the index is 0, then this is our primary region. If it's not, if it's 1, then we're in US East 1 or, so on and so forth, depending on how many regions we've got in our array. That's all it is. And the rest of it is just handing in our properties. So let's actually go into the stack and have a look at what's happening. So it really is very simple. So here I've made a note of the things that I've backed out. So I have removed my SSL creation. I've using the hosted zone. So I did have a function for if the hosted zone doesn't exist, create it. Otherwise, use the existing hosted zone. Creating an HTTP proxy. So at the moment, you can create custom domains on AppSync. However, you can't do geo routing from, say, Route 53 from the same domain to those custom domains. It won't work. So you can only use those custom domains for AppSync as the primary route. So you might call one, Melbourne whatever my domain name is .com. Another one, North Virginia domain name.com, / GraphQL, and that's my API, right? So the way around that is we can put a very simple HTTP proxy. So using API gateway as an HTTP proxy, we can put an API gateway or HTTP proxy in front of our AppSync, and then we don't need to use custom domain names. We can just use the standard endpoint that's created when we create our AppSync. But then we obviously just create a policy saying that this HTTP gateway is the only thing talking to this AppSync, and then we do our geo routing from Route 53. We can now specify, because we can do the same domain name across multiple regions, multiple APIs with the same name in different regions. And we just do our routing based on geo or based on latency or based on health, whatever. So we just say this domain, based on where you're coming from, will route to Sydney region or North Virginia region to the API gateway, and that'll just hand it through to the AppSync. So that way it does work, and it allows us to extend GraphQL to one domain over multiple regions. And then obviously we need to, so this is just the end, is once we've created our proxy, we just need to add it to our DNS to do the geo routing. So that's what I've backed out because that's sort of irrelevant. I wanted to talk you through it, but I didn't want to get into the complexity of the code. The simple stuff is this, right? So if you're used to using CDK, you might see that I've done something slightly different. Instead of writing everything in the constructor, I've just had 2 function calls, and then I'm actually writing out my code as functions. I, being an old school programmer, just find this way easier to understand for me. I know that I can write all of my function inside the constructor, but it actually makes it easier to manage dependencies and manage, like when I'm handing regional table through to another function, just I can see where the flow is, what's going to what function, what's returning from what function, and where it's going, as opposed to if I have it all declared in the constructor with, you know, variables and constants, you know, being handed through, it just becomes really difficult to keep track of when you get into a really complex solution, such as where we're adding all the extra stuff. So the first thing I do is I'm going to call global tables. And then this is the only time we use it is in the global table, is if we're running through the first time, then we're going to run our create global table. If we're not running through the first time, so now the index is going to be 1, so it's no longer is primary, we're just going to go and find. So we're going to use the DynamoDB library table to find from a table name, and then that's why we've handed in the table name from properties. So that will go and give us the DynamoDB object that we need, the table object that we need for later when we need to assign it as a data source to our AppSync. But for the first run through, all we want to do is we're going to use the same defaults. So the actual defaults of when we create a DynamoDB, that means that we can safely deploy without any worry of issues or whatever. We can go in and modify the same defaults, but for now, all I want to do is I want to create a very simple DynamoDB table with regional replication, and I just want it to be on demand. I'm not going to go and set my read writes. I'm not going to go and set all of the different configuration options. I just want the very bare minimum access to and usage of the DynamoDB global table. So all I need to do is set the table name, create my partition key based on the primary key that we've specified, which is the ID, and it's a string. And then I'm basically saying, give me, basically replicate this table to all the regions that are in my array. So the replication regions, as you recall, I've dropped out the primary one because we're now executing in the primary region. So now all I need to do is replicate to US East 1 or any other regions that I add to that array. And that's it. That's as simple as it is to create a global, or this guy here, a global or DynamoDB global table. So that will replicate across my other regions. Each region is a first-class citizen for the global table. Yeah. Do you want to maybe NoSQL know-how? Do you want to explain what a first-class citizen is for those who don't know? And I will continue while you are writing in the channel, basically going through and discussing the AppSync setup now. So AppSync, now we will actually have a different AppSync API in every region. So there's no need to check, is this primary, is this secondary? All we're doing is we're going and setting up our global API. So we're using the AppSync GraphQL API, object. We're giving it a name. So it will be the same name in every region, and I can show you that in the console. And then we're specifying the schema that we want for our API. So I've just done a very simple schema. I've just said I've got a demo, and I'm going to be able to write in the version in this case, and obviously ID will be generated for me. So I can add a demo, and all I'm going to do is input the demo input, which is the version of the demo that I'm doing. And so that's a very simple schema. You can get into complex schema and the like, but for the purposes of this demo, I just wanted to keep it simple. So we're pulling from asset, which just means go and look directly at this file, and there's your schema. That's it. That's the simplest, the minimum that you need to create a simple AppSync API or a GraphQL API in AppSync. But then also we will need to add our resolvers and our so to do the queries and mutations, so the resolvers for our AppSync schema, or GraphQL schema, the first thing I do is I add the data source. So this is where we're actually now using the table, right? So the table is being handed through from once we've generated the global table, or if we're in the secondary region, we've gone and found the global table based on its name. We're just handing it through to AppSync to say, use this as our data source. And one line, add DynamoDB data source, DynamoDB data source, table done. So that's our data source. Then all we need to do is specify, this is our resolver for querying. So now we actually want to do a list, or we want to do a get on an ID. Then these are our get demos. I'm using the base template. So this is just going to do a scan table and a DynamoDB result list. So these are available in the CDK library for AppSync. So you don't have to go and write your resolver template or your mapping template, which is, it's a, I don't know if it's got a name, but it's a very, very unique, it's not just JSON, it's a very unique syntax. It probably does have a name, the type of template that it is. Yeah, yep. I just can't remember what the actual name of the templating language is called. So in this case, all we're doing is we're returning, we're sending our query.
Template language, VTL.
Yeah, VTL, there we go. So this is your VTL for request and VTL for response. So this is just going to hand back. The response one is very simple. Like if we could open this up, it's just a very simple line saying take result and provide. And then the same for create resolver. I'm just using the default DynamoDB put item VTL. So then it understands I need to add a primary key and then the attribute value. And so that's our primary key, obviously, is going to be ID, and we're going to take it from the input. And then the same for response, because once we've done the input, we just want to respond based on, in our GraphQL query, we can specify, like if I'm going to input a version and I just want to know what its ID is, I can specify, give me the ID once it's been created. And so that'll just return the result. And then the last thing that I've got here is just for, so that I can see it when I'm doing a local deploy, I'm just outputting the API ID, the GraphQL, and the region. So as it runs through, it'll show me, actually I can show you the output as I ran it before. It'll show you the output so that I can just quickly grab it and do a query to it. I can see this is in US East 1. It's given me my GraphQL API, and that's the GraphQL API ID inside the console. So what I'll do is I'll bring up Postman, and I'm going to run a query. Where's the body? I'm going to run a query, a new one. We'll call this version 2, because I'm doing this for the second time today. So what I'll do is I'll show you. I'm actually going to talk to my AP Southeast 2 endpoint, and then we'll go and actually go into the console, and we'll have a look at the DynamoDB table in US East 1 to show you that the data is there. Very simple demo. So I'm just doing a mutation, which is going to send my add demo with my version input, and I'm asking for it to hand back the ID. So I send that over, and if it works like it did just before, there we go. So this is my new ID for version 2. So we can see that I've now hit my AP Southeast 2 region, AppSync GraphQL API, and I've created a record. Now, let me pull up my console over here. So that was, what are we? This is just what I executed. So if you go into the console, you can see that's the one I executed before. So we could go and create another one. I wanted to do it in Postman to show you that it's not smoke and mirrors. I'm doing it actually from my local development environment. But let's run over to DynamoDB. And instead of, let me change my region. Instead of looking at Sydney, let's go into US East 1. Taking a few minutes to load. And we'll look at our tables. And I called it devs multiple table. You can see our partition key is ID. And let's look at table items. Cool. So this is the one that we just created. We can compare. I want to show them side by side so you can see it's the same ID. Here we go. So we've got, I'm not going to read it all out, but you can see comparatively it's the same ID. So we've now made a request to AP Southeast 2. We've created version 2, which is the record that we've just added here. We've used the resolver to return the ID that's created when it's adding the item to DynamoDB. And then obviously it's done the cross-region replication within DynamoDB for the DynamoDB global table, because we're now in North Virginia, and it's added the record to our North Virginia table. So that's pretty much it in terms of basics. Where are we? So if there are, thank you. I can see a few people have sent through what VTL stands for. I appreciate that. I use it. I don't have to remember what it's called, so I just use it. All right. So if there is anyone who I guess wants to discuss like other ways of doing cross-region replication, obviously, so DynamoDB tables is a great example. We've had a few people talk about how, yes, great call out from Paul, it's not ACID compliant. Other call out is yes, you do need to handle your write to the database, because obviously you can't lock it. So the application itself needs to handle, what you're going to do when it's writing to, or when you're editing an existing record, because as was pointed out, it is the last write that is taken as the what would you call it? Last write wins. So it is the last write that's taken as the value. So there are other ways of doing replication. Obviously, for this example, this was storing, obviously this is very simple here. We're just talking about version ID. This was storing more key value information for the tenant. So it's profile-based information. It's, the tenancy. When we get into other types of situations, so the SaaS that this built on top of this is a what would you call it? A message-based system. So it is sending objects into the message platform, and they're being stored in S3. And now there is obviously a requirement to have some of these objects in the multiple regions. Some of them are region specific, so then you don't need to actually replicate. But now when we're actually talking about objects, we now have to look at S3 region replication. So that's a whole other story. So there are times when you would use something like global tables, and then there are times when you would use something like a S3 like blob file replication, or you may even use EBS and do backups into your different location. You might want to highlight that one that's just come through from NoSQL Know-How, Paul. Yeah, DynamoDB transactions provide developers automaticity, consistency, isolation, and durability. So that's ACID across one or more tables within a single AWS account and region. Yeah, cool. So that's the call out there that it's not across global tables. It's purely within region.
Yep. And like 41 Wolves asked, how does the actual replication work? Like, I would say, like, I don't specifically know that. I'm sure NoSQL knows that. If you're on the DynamoDB team, it's probably something that we disclose the inner workings of what happens there.
From a developer's point of view, it's magic. It's AWS magic. Yeah. I'm not even going to ask NoSQL Know-How to divulge the secrets of the magic, because a magician never tells.
He told us magic.
It's magic. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So obviously we're not going to share our top secret magic. But yeah, we can say, you know, from a developer point of view, the things that you need to understand is that the thing that NoSQL Know-How has just highlighted is that the ACID compliance is region specific. There is no ACID compliance in terms of cross-region syncing. There are application patterns that you need to be aware of when working with this type of situation. So obviously, you may want to do some sort of queuing or some additional decoupling before you're actually writing to a DynamoDB global table, just to handle you know, the sequence and ordering of data before it gets written. And you know, maybe you're using your DynamoDB global table as a read option for most regions. There are different patterns. Like, I'm just throwing a couple out there. There are different patterns, but it's really based on the architectural principles of the actual application you're developing. So for this one, we're developing a control plane for tenants in a SaaS solution, right? So we need to know, how can we share the tenant information across regions quickly and easily, which makes more sense to do it through a global table where we're very infrequently going to be editing the tenancy information.
I think, like, just to go,
you literally told DynamoDB, hey,
is like magic is the answer we're looking for, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, we provide so many building blocks that enable you to do this sort of stuff. So sure, we could build something like this with Lambda that automatically on write somewhere, like, replicates it somewhere else with a DynamoDB stream or something like that. You know, magic is like our on top of that says we'll take care of that for you. You just tell us that you want it replicated over there.
So exactly to NoSQL Know-How's response to that question that you just highlighted, the magic is right here. That's me telling DynamoDB that I want a global table. So I've just said, replicate it to these regions, and bang, it takes care of it for you.
Yeah. So I'm sorry I got disconnected for a minute there. Did you demonstrate what that looks like in the console through AppSync to write into that?
Yeah. So we did the just for Paul who missed it, we did the query, and it gave us an ID, and then I jumped into the console and we looked at, so this is North Virginia. So I did my query into AP Southeast 2, created a version 2 record, gave me my ID, and you can see here in North Virginia, we've got the same ID from the one that was returned in AP Southeast 2 and the record that we wrote. That's version 2. I mean, we can do it very quickly. Let's do another one, say version 2.1 for Paul. Send that through, and let's actually see how long this takes, right? So 2.1, we've got an ID, so we know that's in, let's do a refresh. There, 2.1's right there. So, I mean, we didn't look at it live because I hit refresh, but it's very fast. Right? Yeah. So I'm not gonna take a stab at how fast that was, and because obviously, and correct me if I'm wrong, NoSQL Know-How, it's gonna depend on the actual size of the record being written and the like, but we're talking near real time here, right? For small records like this.
Yeah, there's some pretty good pipes between. And the other thing that came up just directly behind us before the stream, what Aaron and I were a little flustered with at the start was, what is the actual header that you need to provide to interact with the API gateway? And I think that's a common question. I didn't know it straight away. I knew there was, but I didn't know it straight away. Maybe just show that as well. So when you're using Postman to be able to play with GraphQL, that header that you are required to provide your access to that.
That's only because I set API key authentication. So another really simple way of doing this, when I'm doing development for myself, I will do a Lambda resolver. And basically, all of the Lambda resolver is, it's 3 lines of code. It's basically receives the response and gives back a success. So it doesn't even do a check. It just gives back a success. So it's essentially making it public, but it's doing the Lambda authorizer so that I can do my query. And then as soon as I want to add some authorization, I can then use that Lambda to then go and maybe check a record for a password or integrate it with Cognito from the Lambda authorizer point of view, instead of calling Cognito. And then, there's different ways of doing it. But for me, the quickest way this time was API key. Sometimes I do Lambda resolver.
Yep. Yeah, I just thought I'd call it out because it's not an uncommon question. People ask it all the time, and both of us forgot what that key was before. Like, I knew it was there, I just forgot what it was. So it's good to have a refresher.
I think this is a really good one. Call out from NoSQL Know-How again. if you want to add a region or remove a region later, so we've already created this, right? We want to add another region. You just tell DynamoDB to add and remove the regions, and it's super simple. So it'll do the replication for you once you tell it, I want to add another region, and it's done.
Yep. I think like one day we're probably going to have to get NoSQL know-how to come on and talk a bit about us. I mean, there was some questions like really earlier about like talking about Amplify and designing DynamoDB and what that looks like. Working with DynamoDB is you have to think differently about what you're doing. I did post a link to Marcia's videos on Foobar around designing and building DynamoDB and like what it looks like to build your schema, right? Like, for so many of us developers, you think about a relational database, we know how to do that straight away. It's a different set of thinking when you're thinking about DynamoDB. Working with, extracting or querying or ad hoc querying of DynamoDB is not as easy as you think it is. And that's where you have to be creative in what you're trying to do, which is probably why, we have things at the back of DynamoDB, such as like the streams. So do you want to push that data somewhere else where that you can go ahead and run ad hoc queries at the same time? It made me think straight away about glue elastic views. So if you've got multiple, specific services in DynamoDB, you want to stitch those together, you can use, it's still in preview, but glue elastic views to be able to stitch together multiple different tables and, treat that somewhat as a relational database to do that. It's not directly querying DynamoDB, it's querying like a secondary copy of that. But yeah, it's a definite mind shift in the way you're thinking about working with it. But when you are looking to like something that's like at global scale, and I think like Jeff Barr posted those metrics around it. It was like tens of millions of like requests to DynamoDB, per second on Prime Day last year. So it can handle that sort of load, but you just can't treat it like a relational database. You have to think about it differently.
Yeah. I'm setting myself a task now to go and set up. NoSQL Know-How said that he believes that you can see the latency in CloudWatch. So I'm going to go and check out actually how fast. Obviously this is a very simple record because it's one character, so it's like less than a byte, and an ID. So it might be like a kilobyte at most. So we'll see how long that actually takes to replicate across regions.
Yeah. So I think this is like, there's so much that we're sort of not aware of, and a good simple example like this sort of gives us some idea of like the power of some of these services that we're offering. And you can think about like what you're trying to do. Like so many of look, my customers are mostly Australia based, but I know Aaron's working with customers that are much more global. And when you are building those global applications, there are areas of your data that you need replicated globally, and this is a really handy way to be able to do that.
Yeah, and so like the biggest one for the customer that I was working for here was actually like the DynamoDB global table solved their issue of the data replication between regions, but then the other solve was one, they wanted to use GraphQL. So then GraphQL is way powerful in terms of being able to do multiple queries as opposed to having a chatty interface where you're talking many times to get lots of data from different sources. So that was another requirement because they were just building into an existing AppSync interface or a GraphQL schema, but then they wanted to be able to host it under that one URL. So the beauty here was being able to just create our HTTP proxy and then have one, geo-routed URL, go to any region based on latency, and then say, bang, I need to make a query. I'm going to input some data. In this case, I'm going to add a version. And then somebody else in another region, as they're going along, can see that data. Actually, I've got a question for you, NoSQL Know-How. If I create a record in DynamoDB global table and then it replicates into another region, will it trigger the DynamoDB stream for that other region? So if I've got an event that I want to trigger based on that event being added, does it trigger in the other region as it would in the primary region?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because you might have region-specific changes based on when you want to roll out. For example, like you said, a version, right? You've released a new version of the software. You want to update the link on your website. You've got a build that's going to trigger off the back of that change or something to deploy it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I'm even thinking of like WebSockets, right? So if you're using AppSync subscriptions, and so you've got a subscription for something, and then I make a change in this region that sends it through DynamoDB, it gets replicated to your region, and you're subscribed to a subscription in the other region. Will you get that data?
Yeah.
So we want to say no, as it could trigger, yes, cascading stream entries.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I thought, and that's what I did say before. It does trigger your local one, but yeah, I would assume the same, that you're not going to go and trigger the DynamoDB stream in the other region when it writes. It's more of a hidden write, so it's replicating the data across, and it's not triggering events. But it's got me thinking now we can probably do something to communicate between regions in another way, to say, hey, an update's been made, and do the query and hand it out to the subscription.
Yep. Yeah. All right, we're at time this week. I hope that it was informative. NoSQL know-how, like reach out to us. We would love to get you to come on and spend some time with us going to Dynamo. It's always get questions about it. It's you know, there's so much that most of us don't know about Dynamo, and yeah, we'd love to do
magic.
That.
We are developers, so it's always awesome to have, like, using these services, right? So it's always awesome to have somebody in the service team who knows how the magic works to come and talk and chat with us about it.
So, yeah. Well, thanks everybody, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of your afternoon, evening, or midday. So yeah, thanks everybody for coming along. We'll be here, same place, same time next Wednesday. So see you all then. And thanks so much, Aaron, for putting this together.
No worries, Paul. Catch you later.